I'm Lauren Greci, and you are listening to the Lifestyle with Lauren podcast, the show where we chat all the things. Life, motherhood, Jesus, food, beauty and wellness, and so much more. So grab a hot cup of coffee, kick back, and relax with us. I hope that you find joy, laughter, and encouragement today and every day. Thanks for being here. All right, so today we have Adriana Lewin. I am so excited that you are here, friend. We go back all the way to high school, I think even a little bit before that. You are a mom of three, a mother to a warrior. You have a wonderful ministry, Family Chemotherapy. You are a wife, you're a licensed therapist. You do all the things. So let's talk a little bit about you. Let's start with, let's go back all the way to the beginning.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for having me on. I'm very, very honored to be your first guest. I guess just to give a little bit of information. So, I'm married. I've been married to my husband now for like almost 9 years, coming up on St. Patty's Day. And
wait, y'all married on St. Patty's Day?
We did. We did. Yes, we did. So, my husband's birthday is a couple of days after that. And so I'm like, there's no way that you can forget our anniversary.
Right. No excuses.
No excuses.
Well, that's nice for you because you can loop, birthday and anniversary all in one. You can be like,
exactly. I was his birthday present.
Exactly.
All right. We got married St. Patty's Day. He and I were friends forever before we actually formally started dating. He thinks that we started dating like when we first met. And I was like, no, we didn't. We were just friends. Like I had friend zoned him. He's like, yeah, but you depended on me. And I'm like, we were just best friends. But it did take me like almost 3 years to realize, like, that moment. I don't know if you've seen the movie Clueless, but she's like, oh my gosh, I love Josh. Well, yeah, I had that. Oh my gosh, I love my husband, or, my husband now. It's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm in love with him. And so we actually got engaged when we officially started dating. I actually had our first kiss and everything. We got engaged 5 months after that and got married within another 5 months from there. And we've been best friends, happily married, have 3 kids. My oldest is 6, almost 7. And I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So, and when you mention I'm a mom to a warrior, basically for anyone who's unfamiliar with the lingo, there's also the other terminology you and I kind of talked about before we started recording was momcology, right? Momcologist. That is kind of the term that they use for parents, or technically mothers, right? Because we're moms. So moms of children with pediatric cancer. And so my son had pediatric cancer back. He got diagnosed on Thanksgiving Day, essentially.
Okay, and let's mention which one because you have 3 children. So
yes. So it's my middle. It's actually my middle child. Yeah. Okay. So the one who is 5 years old now, he was diagnosed a month before his 4th birthday back in 2019. He was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma, and that is a solid tumor. It's a rare solid tumor, and they had found it technically back behind his eye, and it was pushing up against his brain, basically. And he started chemo in December of 2019 and finished chemo back in October of 2020. And he was still considered immunocompromised through the end of the year. And then at that point, 3 months off treatment, they considered him healthy enough to be considered, part of the normal population, I guess you could say. And so his cancer is in full remission, which means when they did his scans at 10 weeks, there was no signs of a tumor, which for this type of cancer, it's less common to have someone in complete full remission. Usually there is what they call residual tumor. And so, but I had this feeling, the entire way with all of that, like I knew God's hand was in it, And from the time that, even before he was diagnosed, it was just like this push that I just needed to keep looking for answers. And it finally, when we finally got a diagnosis, where we were told that there was a tumor, but they couldn't really tell us for sure if it was cancer or not. Um, literally, we were sitting in the emergency room. It was midnight, the evening of Thanksgiving, like right before Thanksgiving, and um, they're just like, we don't have anyone that could do a biopsy for a week. Like all of our specialists that could do a biopsy on this thing are out of the country or out of town because of Thanksgiving, and because my son's tumor was right behind his eye, they needed a very special surgeon called an oculoplastic surgeon. So it's even more specialized than an ophthalmologist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were only a handful in Dallas that that had rights to the children's hospital that worked with children, and they were not available. They were not in town. And so they were like, we don't, sorry, we don't have anything for you. You can wait a whole week, because it was Wednesday night, going into Thanksgiving. And so Thanksgiving Day, we woke up and we're like, man, like, can we wait until Wednesday? And I just really felt like God was like really pushing me to go to Houston. We did a whole bunch of research during the day. We, tried to figure out if we could get into St. Jude's, or they have like a bunch of affiliate smaller locations throughout Texas and along the coast and stuff. And we just really couldn't figure out where to go. And we ended up deciding just, we should go to Houston. There's MD Anderson out there. And we didn't really know if they took kids or not. And we were like, at this point, we'll walk into the emergency room, even if we're not a patient, and just be like, please, please, please take us in, And on our way there, I mean, literally, it was like this series of events where one of my closest friends called me. She's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, we're heading to Houston. And she's like, oh, well, my brother is a nurse in Houston. Let me call him and see if he knows anything, and, might be able to tell us where to send you. She calls me back. She's like, hey, I had no idea, but he used to work in pediatric oncology, right?
Wow.
And she was like, so he used to work there. He doesn't anymore, but he now works in pediatric ophthalmology. And an oculoplastic surgeon falls under ophthalmology, basically. And so he's like, she was telling me he works now in ophthalmology. He told me, send me your MRI results, your radiology results, basically. And he will contact his people that he knows. And 2 hours into our drive to Houston, it's a 4-hour drive, 2 hours in, literally all these doors just began to open up. And I just had this like profound feeling that I just knew we were supposed to be going to Houston. Minutes before we left for Houston, I told my husband, I was like, I know someone's going to come in on their day off. I just feel like the Lord is telling us to go. If it doesn't happen though, this like voice in my head is just me being crazy and optimistic, just realize that this might be a bust. This whole trip might be a bust. He's like, I'm okay with that. At least we're trying, So for everyone to literally, for people to open up their doors and just say Thanksgiving dinner while they're having dinner at their houses, just finished eating with family, an oculoplastic surgeon said, yes, I will come in on my day off, have them come in for surgery first thing tomorrow. And from there, like literally just every door opened up, and getting into a surgery room on that Friday, being told by the emergency room, they were like, there's no way really that happens like this, where you're going to have a surgery on the same day. I know that these doctors are trying to tell you that they will have a surgery today, but it's not really how it works. So it may not happen today. And then within 30 minutes, they come back and they're like, I'm telling you, this never happens, but somehow there's going to be, your child is going to have a surgery, like a biopsy surgery, within a couple hours. So we can't feed him. And, like this just never happens. And from there, just God continued to guide us. And we did end up coming back to Dallas after, about a month or so, a month and a half, almost 2 months of being in Houston. But
Wow. So how fast was this all from hearing a diagnosis to surgery? Because everything sounds like it was super fast.
From the time that I finally got somebody to do an MRI, and once we got when we did the MRI on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, it was
Oh
late in
my
the
gosh.
afternoon. On our way home, they said, go to the emergency room. So we went to the emergency room that evening. And mind you, my poor child had not had anything to eat since the day before because he had been fasting for the MRI because he had to be under anesthesia, being, 3 years old.
Mhm.
And it was of his head. And so he had to be still for an hour. And so,
So you also, on top of all that, had to keep a 3-year-old still
mhm,
and
yeah.
not feeding him and everything.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, then we were at the hospital. The next day was Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is when we went to Houston. So that was a Thursday. Black Friday is when we had the surgery. And then it took us almost a full week from there to get biopsy results and actually get in with the oncology and start chemo a week after the biopsy was done.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was really fast.
That's really fast.
I will say that my understanding is usually for children's cancer, the process is like way faster than when an adult gets diagnosed. Um, because that is really fast turnaround time. And it was like literally your life just comes to a complete halt. And then you're forced into a different lifestyle, right? Um, Facing a bunch of unknowns, changing just your day-to-day routine, like everything just changed for us. It wasn't just like a diagnosis, it was who was home, who was taking care of my daughter. Like my daughter was barely turning 2 at that time and she had never been away from me, and it was really hard for her to not be around me all the time. And so eventually months in, she finally got used to me going to the doctor all the time. I'd be like, okay, you're going down for a nap. She'd go, Mommy, are you going to the hospital? you know? So she got used to the routine, unfortunately, but there was a really tough period of time there at the very beginning where we all had to learn to adjust to a new routine, new norms, just a new way of like new dynamics and new interactions with one another. And um, it was a little chaotic sometimes. I mean, even down to the point where it's like I would come home, and if I was at the hospital for 2 days, I'd come home and I wouldn't be able to get dinner done because everybody needed mommy. Like all hands
Right.
were on me. Everyone had to like have me physically touching them and spending time with them. And it was hard to adapt to it. But within say a couple of months, things started to kind of normalize, and the kids kind of figured out the new routine, and it wasn't so difficult. So
Right. Man, so then how was that for you with I mean, you didn't have any time to really process all of this either. You're
mhm.
just going and just continuing to plug and go forward and being told new information. And you're just kind of, I would imagine, just being kind of pulled along and researching like crazy, as I know you probably did.
Oh yeah.
So how was that for you processing all of this? Are you still processing it? Is it now that you're kind of on the other side of it in a sense with him being in full remission? How are you?
um you know I would say, and I would say this is like kind of a common theme among mothers going through a similar situation. It's like the first few months are the hardest. We always, for some reason, it's like the first 2 months, it is the hardest to adjust everything. You're learning the new chemo, you're, waiting to see if chemo is actually working. So you're waiting for those next set of scans, the next test and labs and everything. And it's just something that's so new, and you're constantly troubleshooting and like you said, research. I'm such a control freak when it comes to most of my life that I like to plan everything. Even just recently, I was talking to my husband about our beach trip, and I'm like, it's in 3 months. And yet I'm over here going, we need to start planning like what we're taking. And he's like, honey, it's 3 months away. You don't need to you need to rein it
Yes, you
in,
do. Yes, you
but I
do. You
do.
have to
Yeah.
plan. Yeah.
I know. And so imagine being a parent who's used to having that sense of control through like planning, and all of a sudden you can't plan for anything, and even so when my son started chemo a week later was my daughter's birthday. 2 weeks after that was his birthday. And the very so my daughter's birthday, basically, we had just gotten home from chemo, and we were pretty excited. We were going to celebrate her birthday, make it a special deal, even though we weren't at home. And, we were going to get Olive Garden because it was the closest thing to our to the hotel or the apartment we were staying in. And so we were going to have this like nice little dinner that wasn't just fast food that we were consuming for the past week. And as soon as my in-laws went to go pick up the food, my son spiked a fever and his counts were low. And literally, they walk in through the door. We ran out the door. We didn't even get to spend that time with my daughter, which was really hard. So you learn to, in this lifestyle, it's like you learn to not plan or just become really flexible and not get so disappointed when your plans don't fall through. Like you expect your plans to fall through. And if they don't, like, yay, that's a huge deal, right? Like you get to actually enjoy life with a sense of normalcy, but you learn to anticipate, not to plan, because most of the time those plans somehow fall through. So,
but then how does that make it too for you not going down the dark side? And how do you stay so positive when it's, you're constantly, I wouldn't say you're constantly waiting for the floor to fall out, but you can't plan. Like you said, you can't really move forward with things like that because you're kind of just hoping and waiting. And so how are you handling that? How are you handling staying so positive through all of it?
I'll be honest, the first few months, I would say most of that was me learning to, I think I've just put a lot of my energy into researching and making sure that I wasn't missing anything, that I agreed with what the oncology team would decide on. I joined groups with other cancer parents, especially like the diagnosis specific, and really just put a lot of effort into that. And then I hit a point where, it's hard to stay positive. I'll be honest, for a lot of parents, there's this like fine line where I've always been a person of faith, but right before my son passed, or he didn't pass away, but before my son was diagnosed, my brother passed away. And that was about a year before my son's diagnosis. And my brother's death was so tragic. And long story short, he died for 24 minutes, came back to life. And we were thinking this was going to be a miracle, like, why is it that he was dead for 24 minutes and then came back to life? Like he was going to open his eyes and, life, like it would be a recovery, but like he would still be here. Right. And praying for those miracles, and that miracle never came, and my brother passed away within a couple of days. Like it does something to you, like it hits your faith life in a way that you don't expect it to, because you expect, like, ask the Lord for, your heart's desires basically, and it'll be granted to you essentially, right? And we believed that a miracle was going to happen, and it didn't. And so that, like that baggage, like that baggage that I carried still from that wound from my brother passing away, I brought it into my child's diagnosis, and it was hard for me to remain positive, I think, for the first few months. And I kind of like pushed it to the side by keeping myself busy, but I was very thankful for all the people who would pray for me and pray for my son, because that was really what kept me moving forward. Because I'm like, other people's prayers apparently are really strong and powerful, but like I wasn't really sure where my prayer stood in terms of like, me and God and stuff. And so but I did have, like, there were a couple of moments where I really felt like God kept telling me, like, they're two different things. Like, even though a miracle wasn't granted the way that we wanted it for my brother, doesn't mean that a miracle can't be granted for my son. And I just need to keep clinging to that faith that they are two different situations, and he's got this under control, and that he opened up so many doors and led us to where we were. And it felt like he literally carried us. And so there was that sense of comfort of knowing that, yeah, he did all of these things. So why would he just like up and abandon our family, like hey, by the way, look at all these great things I did for you, but psych, I know I totally use psych back in the old school. Might make me really date me to
Date yourself. That's all right.
So, but I would say like there was a turning point where I had to make a choice really, where I had to realize like, one, there were two different situations, and I just really felt like the Lord was saying that. And it was kind of interesting because I had a family member who would contact me and be like, I had a dream about you, and this is what I felt like God was telling me. And it was literally everything, like confirming the thoughts that I had been having those days before. Um, and this was like several times throughout the treatment. But I think most of all, I remember listening to a podcast that said, you have two choices. You can choose to essentially let a cancer diagnosis ruin your outlook, or you can remain positive. Which one would you prefer? Would you prefer living in the dark, or would you prefer clinging to at least a little bit of hope? And that was really something that really, struck me, I guess, in a sense. And it was just really profound, and it stuck with me. And there are moments where you get afraid, and you don't know. I mean, even now, even though he's in remission, I still don't know if it's long term, if I'm going to have him 5 years from now, if I'm going to have him for another 30, 40 years. Like, there are so many unknowns, but you learn to appreciate what you do have, and that's kind of where I'm at. If that helps you explain how I stay positive. It's like some days it's harder and some days it's easier. And I think it gets easier when you teach your brain to stop focusing on all the what ifs and the negatives, because those can happen. But you can also, like for me, I've chosen to try and make something out of it. And I think that's kind of how I busied myself and using some of the gifts that God has given me. And I feel like God, I don't believe in this concept. I'm just going to throw this out there, but I don't believe that God has this, the idea that everything happens for a reason. Like, I think that's a bunch of crock. I think God allows things to happen in our lives, and we have a choice on how we handle it. We can choose to let God use it, and in that we turn around and make meaning out of our suffering, or we can choose to let the suffering eat away at us. Mm-hmm. And I don't like that feeling. I don't like the feeling of being like a victim and helpless. Mm-hmm. So I allowed myself to use my experiences, I guess, to bring about whatever God wants from that. And part of that is just feel like he prepared me for this my whole life. I am a therapist, as you mentioned. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas. And so I feel like he was the one, well, I know without a doubt that he was the one who led me to that career path. And here I am, like 10 years later, experiencing something really traumatic. Well, two things really traumatic, but experiencing the situation with my son with his cancer diagnosis, and realizing like, wow, there's really not a whole lot of resources. Like, as a therapist, like I think a certain way when I'm going through certain things. And so trying to find those type of resources, those weren't available. And so I immediately decided, I guess, actually, I didn't decide. I really feel like God was like, do this, because I originally said, I will never work with this population, is what I said. I was like, I'm a therapist.
Let's see about that.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I'm never going to work with this population. It's too close to home. Like, I just couldn't handle this. And within time, like seeing that there wasn't that information out there, I was like, at some point, you might want to consider doing something to provide other people with tidbits of knowledge that you've learned along the way, or different ways to cope through it. And I was like, nah. And then all of a sudden, a couple of months later, I'm like, okay, I really feel like I'm supposed to do this. And so then I started Family Chemotherapy, which is a podcast and a website basically that provides blogs and articles that are all related to mental health, coping through pediatric cancer. So it's all predominantly parents, I would say. That's the main population right now, where uh, we just help parents kind of understand what they're experiencing and provide some tools that might help them make it through this time of their life. So
Yeah. And I'll put this in the show notes, but tell everyone, what is your website? How can people find Family Chemotherapy?
yeah, so the website is www.familychemotherapy.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. So those are the big,
Yeah.
that's a little bit about family
Nice.
chemotherapy.
And then of course you have a podcast too.
I
And
do.
yeah. And so you interviewed for your podcast a lot of professionals as well to talk about pediatric cancer, right?
I have interviewed other mental health professionals that come in and talk about all sorts of different things, like, or I even had someone come on and talk about the 5 love languages and how that might help during cancer. Or I had a fellow friend of another high school friend of ours. She is now a certified sex therapist. So I had her come on and have these like conversations around like, how do parents have conversation, how do they address sex when their child is going through pediatric cancer? Because that, like, marriages and the sex life takes a big hit when your kid is really sick. And
Right.
so yeah, so it's just different topics that I bring on people where I'm like, okay, I know either I personally experienced it, or being a part of this small community of other parents, like, you quickly learn there's like reoccurring themes, that these parents struggle with. And so I use the podcast to help address some of that, and same with the website. So yeah.
Good. That's amazing. Now, you mentioned a little bit ago, you said everything happens for a reason, and you don't think that's true, and that God allows certain things to happen. And I absolutely agree with that. I just wanted to go back to that for a second, because if you think of prominent people in the Bible, right? A lot of people always think about Job, of course, because
Yeah.
Job was this standout Christian, and the devil basically says, "Oh, well, what about Job over there?" And God's like, "Okay, go ahead." And you have in it, what a powerful message too, when Job has his best friends, right? He has three guys that he admires. They are all, brothers for in Christ, and they're saying like, what have you done? Give it up. Like, it's time for you to basically curse God. This is ridiculous. And he never does. He does, though, in the end, of course, question God. And God says, who are you to question me, the person who made the earth, the stars, the sun? Did you do that? I love that about God. And he's just like, okay, let me put you in your place. Did you do this? Did you create that? I don't think so. So sit back down. And then, of course, you have Daniel as well. And you even mentioned you had a friend who, which is very powerful, and it really shows how much we need to listen to the promptings of God. You said that you had all these questions, and then that night or the next morning, your friend texted you and said, "Hey, I had this dream, and I just want to tell you about what God is telling me." Like, kudos to that friend for saying that and texting you and listening to that prompting. Because a lot of times we'll get those thoughts of, oh, I wonder what so-and-so is up to. And then we never
Yeah.
text them or call them, when in that exact moment we should
Yeah.
reach out. We should go forward, because you never know what the other person is going through. And maybe they just needed that comfort, that high, that smile that you provide them. So was your friends and family too very, very important during all of this as well, I'm sure?
Yeah. I mean, to go back and answer one of your questions, the story of Job, when you were speaking, one of the things that you said that kind of stood out was this whole concept of like, what have you done? And when you were saying that, what just like really triggered me maybe is that whole like the shame, right? Like, his friends were trying to really be supportive. And unintentionally, they started like, questioning, what have you done? Like, you know, somehow that this suffering was brought on because of something that we've done. And I definitely can say that that is a very strong feeling that I've had to work through, that my other, gold mama friends, momcology friends, whatever you want to call them, like many of them struggle with that too. And it's like, for me, I knew that, seeing that my brother had passed away, and then almost like immediately after my son diagnosed with cancer, I was like, oh my God, people are judging me. Like they think that I'm like this terrible person, like that shame that like is not mine to hold,
Right.
Feeling like people were judging me, that I've done something and that's like the cause of why my son was suffering. Like, I think that was like a really hard thing that, we had to work through. And there's actually a really amazing artist whose child also had same type of cancer as my son. His name is, or his ministry, I guess, is called I Draw Childhood Cancer. And he drew this picture that was literally a mother holding a child. And it was like, it's not your fault, because that is so, for some reason, like as a parent, you're responsible for your child's well-being, and suddenly your child has cancer and you're going through like, what did I feed him? Like, why does he have this? Like, how is this my fault? Like, did I have my cell phone too close to him while he was in my belly? Like something like just the craziest stuff to predispose him. Like, we had him genetically tested and stuff, and it was like, there's nothing to predispose him to cancer. So it's literally, he just had really bad luck, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had to work through these ideas of like, is it my fault? Are people judging me? Do they think it's my fault? Do they think that I'm this like huge sinner? Especially like, what they teach you in prosperity, like what you hear about prosperity gospel, like if something befalls you, then what have you done to anger God? And how do you
and the Christian, unfortunately, I think a lot of Christians feel that way. They believe that way, that if you just mind your P's and Q's and you do everything right, nothing bad will happen to you.
Yeah.
And it's just not true. Bad things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason, and there's absolutely nothing that we do that can alter that can change that. God had this course set way before you were even born. He knows everything. He knows all to infinity, and beyond. He knows it all.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that's really important what you said. I think for anybody who is going through this, to have someone sit and look at them in the face and say, you did nothing wrong, I think can just make a huge difference in someone's life.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Because I think that is definitely something that a person would need to hear externally. Because, as a parent, like you're able to kind of just talk yourself out of certain things. But when you hear somebody else say it, I think there's just a little more power to hearing somebody else verbalize what you need to hear.
Absolutely. And amazing how the devil can really work in our brains. It's mentioned in the Bible, our brain is what he wants, and he works hard at messing with our brains for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Can we go for a second and talk about your brother and what happened? So how old was he and what happened leading up to his passing?
Oh my goodness. So that was actually the week after, it was the Sunday after Easter, or not Sunday, it was the weekend after Easter. I guess it was technically, they found him on Saturday after Easter, and he, it was unexpected. My brother was 31 at the time, and he had just had a child with his wife, his first child. She was 2 months. And he went to work one day on Saturday. He would go doing like home appraisals and stuff. And so he went to go to Fort Worth. He lives very close to, or he lived very close to us here in McKinney. And he was outside of Fort Worth. And really, there's a lot of unknowns about kind of what happened. We just know that he pulled over, and there was a police officer, like a retired veteran. He was a retired police officer, retired veteran. Um, he was with his spouse and daughter, and they were moving stuff because he pulled over into like a storage unit, basically at the entrance of a storage unit, like out in the middle of nowhere. And this officer with his family went through the gates. They told us that they saw him, but he didn't seem distressed. Like he looked at them, but he didn't like smile or anything, but he just didn't look distressed. And so they said they drove past and went through the gates. And when they made it to the end of that corridor, I guess, right before they turned, that they started hearing him honking his horn several times. And so enough to where they were like, we need to go back. We need to find out what's going on. By the time they made it back and turned around and had the gate open, he was unresponsive. He did CPR, but he did not do mouth to mouth. I guess, I've done CPR training and they always tell you like, do mouth to mouth. The oxygen is important, but so is the compression. But I guess it's common for people in the medical field and, first responders, like they don't do mouth to mouth on people that they don't know. And so that was something new to me, but because he only had compressions, but he had no oxygen until the paramedics arrived over 11 minutes after the 911 call. And it took them another, 13 minutes. And so who knows how long he was out before CPR even began. So we know it was about 24 minutes. And by that time that they got him up, and revived, his heart going again, there was just so much hypoxia, like damage to the brain because it had no oxygen. I guess in theory, they say like the first 4 minutes are really vital to have oxygen. After that, prognosis is really poor the more time without oxygen. So when they brought him back to life, he never regained consciousness. So sorry, it's gonna be sad. So took him a few days to basically go completely brain dead. We weren't really sure like what the damage was when he was, revived, I guess. They couldn't tell us the extent. They just knew there was a lot of damage to the brain, and they were just like, he's probably gonna have a really poor quality of life. And within a few days, he just went completely brain dead, and we decided to do organ donation. And as that was like a 3-day process, they do like testing, and it's a surgery, so they keep him alive. And as they rolled him away, that's when we found out. My husband actually got a call from a coworker because the whole ordeal was just so crazy. We couldn't find his cell phone. We couldn't, get a hold of his employer. We couldn't figure out like what happened, and we couldn't even find his car. It was missing. I'm not even kidding. His car was missing. And so, sorry, I was thinking, I'm like, there's just things that are sad, but some things that are kind of funny through the whole process, where it's like, we finally did find his car, and my brother was such a slob. Like, I mean, he was such a disgusting slob. And when we found the car, the only way that they could get in was through the trunk. And so my sister, who's like, 4 inches smaller than me, she's like your petite little Latina, and she was forced to climb through the trunk of his car. And his trunk was like practically like a dumpster with like dirty, sweaty gym clothes that he like. And we're like, oh my God, that is so traumatic that you had to even go through like the trunk of his car. It's like you probably felt like you had to like,
oh gosh, take a shower afterwards.
Take a shower and like, but we did end up finding out like days before him being found unresponsive. They said he had like a really massive headache, felt like he had to throw up kind of deal, held an ice pack to his head while he was at a job site. So, yeah, doctors couldn't really determine what happened. And I don't know if giving them that information, had we known that information, not when they're literally closing the doors and taking him to remove his organs, if that would have made any difference whatsoever in terms of um, what they thought would have caused it. But at the end, they just said, we have no idea. We don't know how to explain what happened to him because his heart was perfectly healthy. All of his organs were perfectly healthy, other than the brain having hypoxia. But they're like, we can't say if they didn't think it was a stroke. They didn't think it was an aneurysm, all your big hitters, basically. They're like, it's not indicative of that. And so we don't really know, and so it's like when you lose somebody, and he and I were close. We both kind of had this like big like spiritual conversion. Like, we lived together in college. We had the same friends because I always protected him and brought him to college, basically got him to come out to live with me, to finish up college while I was there and stuff. And we were close. And so, it was just traumatic to experience. I've never experienced loss before, really, to like with anybody that close to me, and to not have a reason why, I think was just really hard, because you try to make sense of it and you try to be angry, you try to go through the acceptance, but it's like, what do I accept? Like that he just died because God just suddenly said, time for you to go. Like, it's kind of hard for you to come to terms with that. But it definitely was a difficult thing for me to process. It took a lot of time. And I had just had my daughter. She, at the time that he passed away, he was 4 months. My daughter was 4 months. Sorry. My daughter was 4 months. His daughter was 2 months. And so there was like a lot of these like, yay, like our daughters are going to be the same age. We're going to put them in dance together, we're going to get to like experience parenthood together. And,
and with your best friends,
Right. So that happened, and took me a while to like heal from that. And when I finally felt like I was okay, I went back to work for literally 1 week. And then I found out my son had cancer. And I don't know, it's just
you haven't, there was no chance of healing. You basically go from, and aside from that, you just had given birth as well, not, 4 months ago. So your hormones are already going crazy. Your body is healing. And now your heart is trying to heal as well. And then you get another big punch in the gut.
Yeah. And it's interesting, during my son's cancer treatment, there would be times that like, grief hits you. Like it had been almost, if I'm being very honest, it was like almost 1.5 years from the time that my brother passed away to the time that we had a diagnosis. But I just feel like, I don't know why it took me so long, like to maybe because, I had 3 kids and you don't really have a whole lot of time to like process things. Like,
well, you don't have time to yourself.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah. As soon as you want to process, you get asked for a snack. So you just don't get that chance.
Exactly. But when Evan was diagnosed and we were going through treatment, there were times that I would think about my brother and I was able to say, not now, like close that off, not now. Like you've got to keep it together. Like you have got to focus on your child. That's all you can handle at this moment. And I would shut it down, and then it's like literally as soon as my son's treatment is over, it's like anytime I think about my brother, I'm like, let's like go back to that.
Yeah. Well, because you haven't had a chance to grieve. You haven't had a chance to think about it because, as a mom, like I said, you just don't have time. And then when you do have time, in those instances, when it probably was quiet and you were in the hospital and your son's sleeping, or however, then like you said, that's just not the time to worry or think about that right now. And so you were compartmentalizing. So then
Mhm.
how, for the same, question I asked earlier, how is it now? How are you getting a chance to grieve your brother?
Yeah, I do feel a lot better. I think grief is always going to hit you,
Absolutely.
when you least expect it. And um I do give myself chance to grieve him. Uh yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Well, and I don't think, like you said, grief never ends. There's always going to
yeah.
be moments. There's always going to be
Yeah.
smells. There's always going to be a deja vu moment, or you drive by something that it'll hit you and ping you. But I think as time moves forward, the moments that would bring you to your knees and make you cry now make you smile. Would you do me a favor? Would you subscribe to the show by clicking that subscribe button wherever you're listening? It makes a huge difference for the Lifestyle with Lauren community. And I would love for you to share this show with a friend. I know some of you are here because a friend shared it with you, and I am so grateful. So thank you so much for being here and listening. Today's show was edited, mixed, and put together by Jennifer Miner. Music was provided by Matt Bowen, and I'm your host, Lauren Greci. Now let's get back to our conversation with Adriana.
Yeah. I mean, there are times that I still cry, and there are times that, you know, I will say, like, when we started Evan's treatment, like, I was at a different place. Like, I could have joy. So I wasn't like, oh, crying all the time. I was just at a place where grief was not every day or
Right.
every week. It was literally when those memories would come up, and I would have a lot of great positive time, like memories. I wasn't like boo-hoo-hooing all the time. Um, but even like, like we're experiencing like the craziest winter right now.
Yeah. For
Um,
folks that don't know, because we're recording this now, February 20th. Yeah, Texas, we just got slammed pretty good by a very intense winter storm and totally not prepared. We've never seen 0 degree, 1 degree. And yeah, that was very
it was
interesting.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yes. Quickly realized I'm terrible at making snowmen. I'm like,
Okay.
I don't remember it being so
Okay.
hard.
Well, I think part of it was just so cold that it was like ice crystals. They couldn't hold a snowman.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
true.
just like,
That's true. Like piles. It was so fine, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I was telling my kids about it actually just yesterday. I was talking about, I remember it was a Thanksgiving so many years ago. Um, that my brother and my sister and I went outside, and we literally like, I was so thankful that one of our neighbors didn't have kids. I'm sure the other side probably wasn't, a fan,
Oh
but
no.
like we went through and we collected all the snow and like rolled it for houses and created this huge snowman. So I was telling my kids, I was like, we literally rolled 3 massive balls of snow and got it to our house. And we couldn't stack them on top of each other because they were so heavy. So we ended up with 3 random balls like on the side of our house.
You
Like,
could put like make it look like an ornament. You should have
yeah,
put a little stick on the top.
yeah, yeah. So, but I was laughing with them last night about it. I'm like,
Oh.
we took our neighbor's snow, and I was like, we don't want to do that. But apparently, making a snowman is not as easy as it is on the movie Frozen. So
No, absolutely not.
there is an art to it, and because we live in Texas, and
Yeah, we don't have that art.
yeah, I'm
We
like,
don't know it.
it's a long time since I've had to make a snowman. So
Yeah.
we
Did you
like.
watch Frozen too, by the way, with the kids?
I mean, I've seen Frozen,
Well, like
but
this last week, we watched Frozen and we watched
no.
Ice Age. We watched like all the movies that
We
dealt with
barely
it.
had electricity until Wednesday. So we had
Well,
like,
true.
Wednesday night. It was like 3 full days
Hmm.
of on and off.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
We'll say
made
we
do
would
without
start a
TV.
movie and then it would power off and you'd hear both my boys, oh, it
I
was
know.
just it's like, okay, next time when the power clicks on, we'll pick it up where we left off.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
So that's where we were. But yeah, grief is it'll hit you. And right now I do say like, I do feel like I have way more positive memories. There are times like when I'm, I'm a big, obviously being a mental health professional, it's like you learn that your body keeps trauma. And so even if, when you go back and you think of, um, situations, like it's like reliving it and your body literally relives it. So a lot of
Mhm.
those, like the memory is stored in your body and you start experiencing that memory, well, guess what? Your body does the same thing. So like
Mhm.
feeling like, talking about his death, like it still brings me to tears because reliving it is just it's, I mean, it's like your body relives it. It's like you're re-experiencing some of that all over again. But
Yeah, well, absolutely. Your body does keep score. I know
yeah,
we've talked about this previously in other conversations, but yeah, you have to take care of yourself as well through all of this,
yeah,
mentally,
yeah,
physically, emotionally. So how are you taking care of yourself during this time? Because you're homeschooling as well. So two moms that
yeah,
are going through a lot, as well as not getting a break and not being able to step away.
yeah.
What
Learning things day by day. I would say I've learned through my child's cancer treatment and diagnosis that I don't have to have it all figured out. You kind of learn to go with the flow and just something's not working, figure something else out. But I will say that what I think after my son's diagnosis, the way that I've been coping with all of that has been trying to make sense of kind of everything that we've been through. And that's, trying to understand who God is and what this all means and making meaning of the suffering. And um, I've done a lot. Like, I've just, what's the word? Dived or dove? I don't know. I don't know the proper English word. Miss Grammar over
Yeah.
here. Um, but basically, I have been consuming books like crazy to just um, help me process, really, just give me things to think about and form my own opinions and my ideas around what my family went through, and try and make sense of it and just find a place that I feel like I'm good with God and I'm good with life.
So speaking of books, we are in a book club together.
Yes.
Yes. Have you started reading? We are reading The Light We Lost. Have you started?
Yeah, no, no. I probably won't read. I think I'm so traumatized from the last book
Oh,
still.
yes. So our last book was American Dirt, and that was very intense, but such a good book. But
It
yeah,
was a good book.
this one's a little interesting. I was not prepared for some scenes that were mentioned in it. They were kind of like 50 Shades all of a sudden thrown in there. I was like,
Whoa.
where did that come from? Because, if you pick up 50 Shades of Grey, you know what you're getting into. This
Yeah.
book, I was like, oh, look, it's going to be this sweet romantic story. And then chapter 9, boom, there it is. You're like, okay, hold on.
Yeah,
Was not ready for that.
I'm more of a nonfiction reader. Um, like I think that's like where I'm at right now in
Mhm.
my stage of healing. Um, my heart needs more nonfiction, like books on trauma, books on I don't know, like recovery and just like one of the books that I mean, I loved, and I'm so glad it was like one of the first books that I picked up to read right after. It is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz um, back in the World War II. And so he just analyzed people and his experience. And it's basically like, as I read it, there were so many parallels to, because I also have a book club for parents in pediatric cancer, and that was a book that we read, and it was just something that really struck many of the parents. Were like, yeah, there are so many parallels, to how trauma affects people in general, especially when it's like a group traumatic event, you know? And so, before I got to like his conclusion about man's search for meaning, essentially, I had these conversations with like priests and theologians and just like, different people, and just like what I told you earlier, like I just don't think that God doesn't have things happen for a reason. Like we choose what to do with it. Um, and that I think is such an important piece in the healing, is how we choose to process trauma like that. And so um, that was just a really amazing book, because it was literally like, oh my gosh, this person, like, even though he hasn't been through cancer, he has been through something really traumatic, and he was able to articulate much of what I was feeling and thinking. And so it was just a very profound book. So I'm kind of in this like space of hearing people's stories of resilience,
Right.
to help me heal personally and just continue to heal. Because I do think that my experience going through pediatric cancer and is going to be a lifelong journey of healing, because it's just so much. It was so much so fast, and it had affected, and it still continues to affect different areas of our lives. And so um, it's affected us in such profound ways. And I think I'm still in this like making sense of it. Hence why I'm writing.
I was going to ask, are you writing a book? Are you just journaling?
No, I'm actually writing a book.
Good for you, friend. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, I'm writing a book about it. I have 2 books for sure. That one I haven't even shared it with you, but I started the intro to one of them. And then I've worked on like 2 chapters on another one. And the one that I'm writing right now that I think I'm going to try and focus and knock out first is, I haven't really decided on the title, but basically it's going to be like a survival guide for parents going through pediatric cancer, and just like different things to anticipate, and mindset, I guess you could say, like how to troubleshoot, and different things that might come up like in your relationship, or how to parent your children, or keep discipline consistent and stuff like that. Just like the how to when your child really gets diagnosed, because there's just not really a whole lot of information for parents out there. It's like, how do I discipline my child who's going through cancer? And then how do I discipline the one who's not going through cancer?
Right.
And, they're going to notice.
A big question too.
Oh yeah.
Everyone, you probably think it yourself, and you're like, well, he is battling cancer. He's going through this. I can't punish him for this. He's already, has enough on his plate. I don't want to, but yeah.
That wasn't how we approached it.
You're still getting punished.
Yeah, and I think part of that, because I do have that therapist background, and just different, like I'm a problem solver. That's what a therapist is. Like you kind of problem solve, you look at different therapeutic approaches and different things that help you cope through different types of situations in life. And so having gone through this experience, having a lot of that already as like something in my tool bag, it didn't keep me from experiencing the grief and the pain and all that. But I feel like I had tools that helped me not go into complete despair,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also had a therapist who I needed during that time. So yeah, the book itself is just, for this one, it will be predominantly for pediatric parents and families going through it, and other clinicians, that they can, be aware of things that our families, I guess, go through. And then I feel like there's so much overlap what I write, and so I'm kind of simultaneously writing both books, if that makes sense, but trying to focus on one first, because I don't want to be that person who's got like 7 things like in the air at one time. But the other one that I do plan on hoping to finish at some point before the end of the year is a book about experiencing my brother's loss, then my son's diagnosis, and just the mindset, like of surviving really traumatic experiences, and how you can choose to come out, resilient, or choose to let it make you fall apart. And so I'm hoping that it will be kind of an inspirational story to other families who,
Mhm.
not even like, it's not even cancer specific. I feel like it's just a story about resilience that hopefully
Yeah.
it will help other families or other people who just want a positive read and just, change
Well, I
that.
think today everything you have shared has been um, definitely encouragement to, I'm sure, a
Thank you.
whole lot of people. So thank you for sharing all of that
Yeah. Thank you.
and being vulnerable. I appreciate it. And I know
Thanks for
others.
making me cry.
You're welcome. That's my goal. No, not really. It's not my goal.
I already knew I was like, oh my gosh, before this whole thing, I was like, oh my gosh, it's one of those days that everything,
Oh.
like I can't even remember, something like super simple made me cry. And I was like, oh hell, I'm in trouble today. I was like, this is going to be if I can make it through this without crying, it will be a miracle. So,
Well, I don't know if you're the same way that I am, but as soon as I start crying, I will start crying about everything. It's like if I open the floodgates, then all of a sudden I'm crying about things from 5 weeks ago that I had no idea I was holding on to. And then I just am a blubbering mess. And my husband will walk over and he'll be like, wait, are you crying? Like, what just happened? What did I miss? And I'm like, oh, I don't know what happened. And it's just, yeah,
that's so funny.
yeah, I get to be messed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I am so grateful for you, friend. I do want to ask you 3 questions that I'm going to be asking all of my guests, the same 3 questions. What are you reading? What are you loving? And what is making you laugh?
I am reading The Body Keeps a Score by, I think his name is Bessel van der Kolk, I think is his name. And what's your second question?
What are you loving?
What am I loving?
And it can be
Heat.
anything. Heat, yes.
Power. Electricity.
Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
Wi-Fi, everything that comes with having electricity. Yeah, that and Audible, because Audible is amazing. That is like my favorite. I get a lot of my reading done, having 3 kids, through listening to it at the same time as I like read. So I like switch between the 2. So that's the other one. And
So
then
do you walk through the house with like your phone in your pocket and earbuds in and you're like doing things and listening? How does Audible work for you with kids and stuff?
I predominantly do it while I'm making meals, essentially.
Okay.
Like while I prep a meal, or if I'm doing something like putting away clothes or something and the kids are entertained, I'll pop it in,
Nice.
So, but it's not all day. It's just little pockets of time here and there that I try.
Nice.
So yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then what is making you laugh right now? I always want to try to end it on something super positive that might make others also laugh.
What is making me laugh? I don't know. My kids.
Yeah.
My kids make me laugh. They're just so crazy. I mean,
Aren't they
I
all?
would say, yeah, that's probably it. Like I laugh at a lot of things, but as a parent, there's not a whole lot of time to laugh other than with my kids, the silly things that they do. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, friend. I am
thank
so
you.
grateful to have you today and to have you on here. And I will put all of the things that you mentioned in the show notes, the books, your website, your links, and all of that stuff. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to the Lifestyle with Lauren podcast. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe, comment, leave a review, and share with your friends. Thank you so much. Today's show was edited, mixed, and put together by Jennifer Miner. Music was created for the show by Matt Bowen, and I'm your host, Lauren Greci. I'll be back here next week with another wonderful conversation. Thanks for listening today. Bye, friends.